So in this video, we're going to have a look at how the kidneys actually filter. And in doing so, we need to have a look at the blood vessels that go to the kidneys. And we've spoken about that briefly, but we also need to have a look at the capsule as well, the capsule of the nephron. And you're probably thinking, Mike, what the hell are you talking about? So remember that in the kidneys, you have these things called nephrons. Now, if I were to just very quickly draw up a kidney, and we've done this in the previous video, but remember you've got the cortex and you've got those renal pyramids and you've got the minor calyx, and they all drain together into the major calyx, which then goes to the renal pelvis and so forth. And I told you that you're going to have blood vessels, you're going to have the abdominal aorta coming in, and then it's got a whole bunch of branches. Now, I'm not going to go through the names of those branches again, but I'm just going to show you a couple of things, which is the afferent arteriole. So I said that at this afferent arteriole, this is where we have something called a nephron. And a nephron looks like a little bit like that. So if I were to just draw it up down here very quickly, you're going to have the blood vessel coming in called the afferent arteriole, right? This blood vessel comes in, it turns into this big ball of yarn called the glomerulus, right? And then on the other side, you've got the efferent arteriole. Now, it's important to know we actually have 1 million of these nephrons per kidneys. So you don't just have one of those things. You've got 1 million of them, each kidney. Their job is to filter the blood, right? So a nephron filters the blood. So we're going to have a capsule that sits around this, right? And then there's various aspects of the nephron, which we'll talk about in a future video. But there's these tubules, right? All right. So what we're going to talk about in this particular video is how the blood that comes through here actually gets filtered into this capsule, right? Because it doesn't filter everything. It's very selective. And I told you that whatever gets filtered into the capsule, whatever makes it out the other end becomes urine, right? It's our pee. Now, I haven't told you this, but 98% of stuff that gets filtered into the glomerular capsule and into the nephron, 98% of it actually gets thrown back into the body, and only 2% comes out in the urine, which makes sense because we filter many liters. We filter something like 250 liters around about of blood every single day. So you don't want to pee 250 liters a day. So we throw 98% of that back, 99% of that back. So what we're left with is around about 2 liters, which is what we pee out every day. So what we need to look at in this video is the fact that there's actually, it's not just the blood vessel and the capsule. There's a couple of membranes here. There's a couple of barriers that allow for this filtration process to be selective. And that's what we need to look at in this video. So let's now take a look. So first thing I want to draw up is the blood vessel coming in and across. Afferent arteriole. And then that's the glomerulus. I know I'm not drawing it like a ball of yarn, but I want this to be the afferent arteriole. So that's blood coming in. And I want this to be the efferent arteriole, blood moving away. And this little lump or bump is going to be the glomerulus. But it just makes it easier if I draw it like this at the moment. So the first layer, the first thing that allows for us to filter the blood, because again, not everything comes out, it's very selective. Inside blood vessels, you have epithelia. Because remember, epithelia lines hollow organs. That includes blood vessels. Now, the epithelia that lines blood vessels isn't called epithelia because we like to make things difficult for you. It's called endothelia. So I'm drawing it up here. Now, interestingly, the endothelia at the glomerulus has holes in it. Now, if something has holes in it, we can use a term that's called fenestrated. So The glomerulus has fenestrated epithelia. So there's the epithelia, and there's holes in them. Now, let's write that down. Fenestrated endothelia. Endothelia is epithelia, so it's basically interchangeable. And if you hear the term endothelia, just know it's going to be in a blood vessel, right? Now, the diameter of these holes are about 70 to 100 nanometers. You're probably thinking, how big's that? So think about this, right? If you have 1 meter, everyone knows the size of 1 meter. Now, take 1,000th of 1 meter, right? If I were to go 1,000th of 1 meter, I get 1 millimeter. And everyone knows the size of a millimeter, right? So take 1,000th of a millimeter. All right, we're getting to really, really tiny sizes now, right? 1,000th of a millimeter is 1 micrometer. All right, we're still not at nanometer yet. Take 1,000th of a micrometer, and now you have 1 nanometer. So the diameter of these fenestrated endothelia, right? The diameter of this is 70 to 100 nanometers. Very small. So what is that small? What can fit through that? All right, well, let's take a look. If I were to draw up some components that's moving through in the blood, like a red blood cell, for example, that's coming past, red blood cells are actually about 10 micrometers in diameter. So that's bigger than nanometer. In actual fact, that's 1,000 times bigger than what can actually fit. So it's not going through. What about white blood cells? White blood cells are actually bigger than red blood cells. They're actually 100 micrometers. So that's way too big to fit through. So white blood cells aren't coming through. But what do get through the fenestrated endothelia are proteins, or at least some proteins, ions, and some waste products, right? Like urea or creatinine, for example. So small molecules. All right, that's not the only membrane here. We've got another membrane. All endothelia, right? So all epithelia from blood vessels, all endothelia sit on something called a basement membrane, which is made up of connective tissue. So this is called the basement membrane. Basement membrane made up of connective tissue, and the specific subunit of connective tissue here is collagen, and collagen is a protein. And what do we know about proteins? They're negatively charged. So this basement membrane is negatively charged. Now, what do you know about proteins? What charge do they have? Proteins are negatively charged as well. So that means any proteins that get through the fenestrated endothelia are going to be repelled, because like charges repel each other. If that was a positive charge, then the proteins would be attracted to it, but it's not. So this basement membrane is important because its primary job is to repel proteins. Right? Now, the third layer is of these really specialized cells called podocytes. Do you know what podo or pod means? You know that site means cell. Pod means feet, right? Like a podiatrist. You can see the feet on these podocytes. So you've got these podocytes, and these feet have gaps between them as well, but they form the capsule, right? And if you have a look, these podocytes are about 10 to 40 nanometers, so they're even smaller. So again, they're now hitting the point where no cells should be getting through at all, and now no proteins should be getting through. The main reason why no proteins should be getting through is because of the collagenous connective tissue of the basement membrane. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is because sometimes if somebody has some sort of renal or kidney issue, they can pee out cells, they can pee out proteins. Now, if somebody were to pee out red blood cells or white blood cells, what would you think could be the matter? I want you to think about this, right? Just again, you've got kidneys, you've got ureters. So I'll draw up the other kidney here. You've got ureters. They go to a bladder, which then goes to a urethra, right? So let's just say you peed out and there was blood in it. Is that telling you that there's damage to these membranes? The answer is not necessarily, because these membranes, all this stuff here is happening in here, right? This is where all those nephrons are, and they empty out into here. So it means that maybe you've got an infection at the ureters, maybe you've got an infection at the bladder, maybe you've got an infection at the urethra. So maybe a UTI could be the cause of the blood. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is damage here. What if you've got proteins? Well, proteins might be a better indication that there is damage happening, or you've got a really strong filtration process, something's really strongly pushing the fluid out of here, pushing so hard that it's even squeezing proteins through. And that's something that can happen. But if you do get proteins in the urine, or at least significant amounts, for example, like albumin, for example, a very common protein, it could be because there's damage to the basement membrane. And a common disorder of the basement membrane of the nephron is called glomerular nephritis. Glomerular, talking about the glomerulus, nephritis, inflammation in the kidneys. So that's a quick run through of the three various layers that help the filtration process. Fenestrated endothelia, basement membrane, and podocytes.